Okay, guys, I'm going to try this one more time. Because previously, when I tried doing this, I went almost an hour, so I know a lot of you don't want to hear that. But as you know, a lot of us, as Sonic fans and fans of the comic by Archie Comics, have our own difference of opinions. There are certain characters we like, and certain characters we don't like. But then comes the soft reboot that occurred with 252. Some of us, even to right now, like what's going on because it's a mixture of being close to the games and mixture of the SatAM cartoon. Well, there are others that don't like it because pretty much, well, they feel it's unnecessary. And there are things about it that just don't make sense. Well, one of those fans, out of respect, is MixedFan8643. MixedFan8643 has given his fair share of opinions and reviews as the media man, which is his take on Linkara and Nostalgia Critic on DeviantArt, and he's given his own opinion and reviews, both positive and negative, on a lot of things Sonic related, whether it's the Sonic SatAM cartoon, Sonic X, Sonic Boom, the comics, you name it. Well, he recently put out a list. It's not a top 10 list, but it's 8 entries of why. Basically, it's 8 entries that he made of things that are wrong with the soft reboot of the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic book. Now, he does bring up that Sonic Universe is basically the better comic right now. But he does bring up there are several problems. Now, I'm going to list these out real carefully. I'm going to list some of these out. Now, the first one of the first entries he brings up is the continuity. Now, he basically mentions that the big problem with the soft reboot is that it fails to do what it should do, be a reboot or a soft reboot. He points out that the soft reboot has the continuity in which all games, except for Colors, Lost World, Unleashed, and Chronicles, have already happened. Well, let me explain. Let me correct him on this, and I know he's listening. Sonic Colors, the DS version, did happen, so that's the only exception. Now, what he does say is there's already a continuity scheme. Now, he does say that is the first red flag, that is the first continuity scare that they have, because not many people like himself have played all the Sonic games, and that anybody, let's say a newbie to the comic, who picks it up, won't know exactly what's being referenced at all. I think that's what he says. Yeah, he basically says that they get references that people like him won't get because they haven't played all the games that they're referencing. Now, he does mention that for diehard gamers who played them all and do read the comics, this isn't a problem. But like I mentioned, for someone that might be new to the comics and wondering what the heck people are talking about, it is. Now, one of the things he does mention, because he refers to the soft reboot as a reboot, he says one of the biggest problems that the continuity goes against is the point of being a reboot. He says that a reboot is not, continuing on from the old continuity or referencing it or doing anything like that. A reboot is basically starting from scratch, which is true. But let me kind of counter that by saying that the reason it was done the way it was done, and he does mention this later on when he talks about Paul Kaminsky, the reason it was done the way it was done is because there's a lot of older readers like myself that want to feel that connection and not feel like everything's just being thrown away. You want to have that connection. You want to have that knowledge that, yes, this is to a lot of us, a soft reboot. a starting over point, but there are connections and references to the old timeline, and they bring that up somewhat in later issues down the line. Now, one of the other things he points out in his second entry is the artwork. He says that some of the artwork is not doing so well. Some of the names he brings up are Dana Skelly, which is at the top of his list, I think. Evan Stanley, which I'm kind of surprised about. Terry Austin. Who else we have? Edwin Hung. And who else? Dan Chameau. You know, he brings up a lot of listing here. He says some of them are good. You know, some do match up well, do mesh well. He does reference that. But he mentions that some, but the ones that I've talked about, he basically feels, in a sense, he kind of feels needs improvement and needs to be put on stories that, you know, fit their style. Like with Dana Skelly, he basically feels that with 284 and its storytelling, it doesn't match her styling. It doesn't match her artwork styling. And that if you're doing a more comedic story, that fits her better. So, again, though, that's another problem. And I'm not trying to say the artwork isn't good sometimes in the issues since 252. But it all depends on what's going on. And another thing I think what MixedFan and anybody else has to understand is these are freelance artists. Just like Ian Flynn, whether you like the guy or you don't, he's a freelance writer. And they got a lot on the table. So let's say someone like Tracy Yarlin or Evan Stanley is, you know, trying to be scheduled to do the artwork for, let's say, 284, and they can't get them, and Dana Skelly is available, they go with her. Now, he does mention that people like Lamar Wells, his talent is being wasted. Jennifer Hernandez is good artwork to look at. So he does have, like I said, compliments for some of the artists. Now, he does say that if they changed the inkers and toned down Dana Skelly's cartoony artwork, it might look better. The third entry he talks about, now his third entry is about Sally and how in the soft reboot, she's portrayed as an incompetent dumbass. Yeah. Here's a character he actually defends in the comics, but when he looks at her in the soft retcon, he looks at her as being portrayed as an incompetent dumbass. He points out the fact that she basically acknowledges, or at least, okay, let's see here. He basically acknowledges that she doesn't really do much when she's fighting, and that she's mostly standing around doing nothing. Well, she does fight. She does fight, don't get me wrong. It may not seem as much as she should be, but she does fight. Don't get me wrong about that. Now, he points out that she is not an incompetent writer. I mean, incompetent writer, but incompetent fighter. She is not an incompetent fighter. But for some reason, she doesn't do anything. And that one of the reasons he points out that they're not doing much with her from a fighting standpoint is because Archie Comics, in his mind, is afraid the fans are going to go back to calling her a Mary Sue, and they don't want that. They want a character of Sally Acorn that everybody can like. Now, he brings up another reason why she's portrayed as an incompetent dumbass, for the fact that, you know, Sally Acorn is supposed to be smart, a smart tactical leader of the group. Yet in the reboot, she hasn't really done anything that proves that. You know, she hasn't done anything clever or come up with any clever plans. But he does mention that she does, but he does acknowledge this in 282. He does say that's the only time in his opinion. One of the things that he points out that he says makes her look incompetent in the soft retcon is she points out that they have a Chaos Emerald to Eggman. Basically saying, and I quote, "This is the same Sally Acorn who thought letting Eggman know that they have a Chaos Emerald was a good idea when it wasn't. It was a dumb idea and shows that Sally Acorn hasn't lost her fighting abilities, she's lost her intelligence too." Now, I'm not going to say that Sally hasn't changed in the soft retcon reboot. She has. But like I said at the beginning, a lot of these characters got tweaks to their personality. A lot of people may not like these tweaks, but it's what you got. Let's see. So, yeah, he brings up the fact that Sally's not being portrayed well here, except for maybe one issue or two. Now, we get to his fourth entry, which is about Paul Kaminsky in Paul Kaminsky's Mandates. Now, he points out that Paul Kaminsky, even though he was not a writer, he was an editor, a head editor. But one of the things he always brought up, or one of the things he brings up here, because he's brought it up before, was how he told Tracy Yardlin when it came to the Sonic Universe story, Pirate Plunder Panic. He basically points out that Paul Kaminsky told Tracy Yardlin to put Amy and Cream into the story, even though that shouldn't have been his business to tell Yardlin what to do with which characters in the story. He basically points out that because of this mandate by Paul, Blaze ended up being made to look so bad, was made to look bad just so Yardlin could give Amy and Cream something to do. And then he also points out the other mandate that concerns Countdown to Chaos, and I mentioned this earlier. And that is the subplot in Countdown to Chaos where the characters, thanks to Nicole, regain the memories of the old universe. But he points out that even though they remember her and all that, it's never brought up again. Again, it's like I said, and I'll say this again, it's done for a lot of the older readers that want to have that connection. But I will admit it's also done in effect to gain the newer readers' interest in the old universe, and from a financial standpoint, maybe get them to get invested in buying some of those past archives or super specials or graphic novels that center around or carry those stories from the old universe within them. That's one of the other reasons Paul maybe had that mandate go down. Even though I will agree it doesn't make any sense if you're not going to really talk about the old universe or bring it up any time soon. I mean, yes, like I mentioned earlier, they still bring it up every now and then, but not as much to make it a real subplot that has a reasoning behind them trying to repair the world. Now, he does bring up on his fifth entry the consistency. The consistency, in his opinion, is a real bad thing here. Well, not real bad. He basically says that some of the consistency deals with the characters themselves. Like the writers can't, like Ian Flynn or any other writers, can't decide whether the Freedom Fighters are an awesome team of heroes that could take care of anything and handle anything, or a bunch of incompetent morons who can barely hold their own. He brings the same thing up with Blaze in Pirate Plunder Panic, and how it can't be decided whether she can take out Captain Metal, like that, or not. Basically, he points out that one of the reasons of the inconsistency is to make the newbie characters or the newbie antagonists look strong and powerful. One of the things he brings up with the freedom fighters and the inconsistency of how they're portrayed is 266 and 284, which some might agree with him on that, but from a storyline perspective, you got to look at it as though Eggman wanted to teach them a lesson, mostly Sally a lesson of, hey, you don't mess with the Eggman. So, he brings up Sonic, of course. They don't know whether he brings up Nicole, who's supposed to be the super powerful, AI, and yet she can't detect the Tails doll being on the ship right away. It takes her to 284 to realize this. And that's another thing, too. The Tails doll. Basically, he points out, that when the heroes are caught by surprise by the attack by the Battlefield Armada because of the Tails doll leaking the plans to Eggman, he points out that a lot of these characters that they're facing, not every character, but certain characters of the Freedom Fighters had defeated these characters by themselves, either in the new timeline or the old timeline. They have taken care of them themselves, and they shouldn't have a problem dealing with them. Characters like the Witch Carters, the Battlefield Armada, things like that. He brings up Nicole. How she's made to look super incompetent just so the bad guys can win too. He points out that she doesn't do anything against Paige because, heaven forbid, the heroes actually do something competent, and when she becomes Overclock Nicole, she's still incompetent, and doesn't do anything. And he reminds us that Overclock Nicole is Nicole's super form. So, and yet she's unable to stop Paige, even though she stopped Paige the last time. He basically points out that that's a whole level of stupid. And when he points out to Ian Flynn, I'm not sure if Ian reads it, he basically asks Flynn what the heck is wrong with him. Why can't he make up his mind on how strong and capable the characters are? It's not that hard to keep them consistent. They're either incompetent or they're not. Another thing he brings up is the writing. He says that the reboot has two different problems in terms of writing that he can gather. Problem one, as he points out, is throwing away great ideas and concepts. Basically pointing out that some stories like Shadow Fall had great potential but wasn't achieved. Shadow World Crisis, same thing. Basically, he points out in this entry that there's so many he points out with these two problems, the first one being that there's so much potential wasted with concepts and ideas that it's not even funny, it's a joke. And then he says the best example is Spark of Life. And that the wasted potential there could have made things interesting. Like, Paige could have been Nicole's mother, or could have been what was left of Nikki being corrupted. Now, one of the things he brings up when it comes to the writing is the fact that, like myself, because I've even said this before, and I think it's one of the reasons when the Bumble King forums existed, I was kicked out. He, like me, was able to predict what was going to happen. He points out that with Shadow Fall, with the Shadow Fall arc in Sonic Universe, that he was able to point out what was going to happen after part 2, after the second issue. And the same thing with the Champions arc. And he says here he's able to guess right off the bat from part 1 what was going to happen. Now, he does say that with Worlds United it was the same way, but there were a few things that did surprise him. And then he gets to currently Panic in the Sky, where pretty much he's already guessed, just because of 283 and now 284, exactly what's going to happen. And this is being one of the reasons why he's not going to read the rest of the Panic in the Sky story arc. I'm pretty sure he'll read it if something does surprise him and does come out of the blue that he's got to read it to see it to believe it. But yeah, pretty much that's another one of the bad things about it is to him is the writing and how potentially a lot of creative ideas and concepts are wasted and how predictable things have gotten. Now the 7th entry is the pacing. Basically he points out that the pacing is basically a mixed jumble bag and that it's uneven. Like the pacing just doesn't fit well. Like it's either fast or slow. He points out that the Champions arc is one of those story arcs or subplot arcs in the main arc that shouldn't be there because it slows down a story that should just be over like that or should be over sooner than later. In fact, he brings up what a lot of us have said about Shadow World Crisis. You know, he brings up the Shadow World Crisis. ISIS is how, basically, as he points it here, and I quote, is an example of one of those, how can a story have too much plot and yet not enough plot at the same time? You know, he says that and then he says that, Champions is just filler issue, it's just a 4-issue filler. And he also brings up the fact that the bad pacing is something even diehard fans of the reboot, soft reboot, can agree on. He says he does mention this, and this is true. He says he's not the only one who thinks Shadow World Crisis has overstayed its welcome. Even some of the fans, and this is, I quote what he says, even some of the fans wish it would have just ended already because it's taking far too long, and given the fact that there's barely any connection between the stories in the Shadow World Crisis arc. And again, he brings up Champions as being one of those examples. And that because of that, it makes Shadow World Crisis feel even longer. He says that Worlds Unite is enough said about its pacing, but he does bring up some positives. He does bring up that the Silver Age arc, Eggman's Dozen, and issues 257, 58, and 59 are good examples of pacing. Now, his final entry is about the reboot feeling very soulless. Now, he does accept that people will like the reboot, the soft reboot, and that he can also accept that some people don't, that some people will respect that he doesn't. Now, as I read here, because this is the one part I kind of stopped on when I realized, hey, I was going a little too long. I mean, way too long. He says, basically in hindsight, when you think about it, the soft reboot, whatever you want to call it, really does feel like a hollow shell of what the comic used to be. He says the comic in the old universe was rich with history, lore, world building, and a lot of character moments and development. The soft reboot, however, has every little of that in comparison. The world building is really shoddy at best, for we don't get to learn about a lot of the places we visit so far. We barely know any of the history about the New World, and there is fewer emphasis on character. He says, now he goes on to say a lot of the time in this comic, the characters don't really feel much like characters anymore, especially the Sega cast. They feel more like one-dimensional depictions of themselves with much fewer moments than given that give them a character or development and less personality than they once had. Now he does say one of the biggest things, as I scroll down a little further, one of the biggest things that shows how soulless the comic soft retcon reboot is nowadays is in the marketing. Basically, he says that for some reason the comic feels the constant need to hype up every single story it tells as if it's some kind of big event and or amazing story that we have to read. So the comic feels less like a comic, more like a publicity stunt in that regard. He mentions that World Unite in general was nothing more but a big publicity stunt. The hype that the comic got up, he says the hype that comic, it says Archie Comics, hyped that comic up to no end and generally was nothing but a big publicity stunt. Okay, sorry, I kind of reread the same sentence. It says Archie Comics hyped up that comic up to no end and acted like it was some big summer blockbuster event that we had to read. They didn't care about the quality of what they were advertising at all. They just cared about getting lots of readers, which is pretty much the point. Now, he does say that one of the other reasons is all this mindless Sega fan service and nostalgia pandering that adds to the soulless nature of the comic. They don't add to he says that he basically points out that they don't add to the comic or improve the quality of the writing. They just make the comic feel like a mindless advertisement for the Sonic games. So, yeah, that's pretty much what he says here. I'm not going to read any more of it. I'll just provide a link down below. But in turn, basically what MixedFan is saying here is, there's just a lot of things wrong with the comic that need to be fixed. And I will agree there are some things that do need to be fixed. I'm not going to deny that. But when you think about it, let me put it to you like this. Let me check the timing on this audio. Let me put it to you like this, because we'll get into about a half hour. I can understand MixedFan8643's frustration. I can understand anybody that agrees with him in their frustration. But let me explain this. Whether you like Ian Flynn and his style of writing, whether you like Tracy Yardlin and his style of artwork and writing, same with Evan Stanley, same with Dana Skelly, Jim Amesh, Lamar Wells, Jennifer Hernandez, you name it. Whether you like their style or you don't, the truth in the matter is they're known as freelance writers and artists. And what that means is they work on other projects. So sometimes their pacing can be a little off when it comes to the artwork or the storytelling. Sometimes the story might feel rushed. Sometimes the story that they might do, like Evan or Ian or Aaliyah or Tracy, it might feel rushed in the end, but it's because they're also working on other projects. They have a deadline to meet. So sometimes sometimes being that they want to get paid, they want to meet that deadline as quickly as possible. So sometimes they have to rush something to make sure they get it out on time so they can get to the next project, which also they have to get out on time as well. So I can understand that frustration. And maybe it's time, maybe it is time for Archie Comics to kind of reevaluate and reassess the staff on this comic. Maybe they need to pace it down a little bit. Maybe they need to sit down with Ian Flynn and kind of say, look, I know you got a lot on your plate, but do you mind stepping down maybe and letting somebody new come on board that could take over? And I'm not going to disagree that the behind the scenes lawsuits with Penders and anybody else didn't help, but what are you going to do? But I hopefully for a lot of people's sake, including yours, Mixed Fan, hopefully they will improve. I mean, you got to look at it this way. Archie Comics went through a lot earlier this year. They really did. I mean, basically they had a huge delay from the end of last year to about the midpoint of this year, or at least the midpoint of spring of this year, and that was it. So, I mean, they were moving offices as well, so that didn't really help. So a lot of things happened that you got to take into consideration, and a lot of things are happening. Like I said, Ian Flynn, he's a freelance writer, whether you like the guy or you don't. He not only works on Sonic books, but he also works on the Ninja Turtles for IDW. He works on some Red Circle books. He works on some other IDW books. Heck, he's possibly writing a script or two for Sonic Boom Season 2. Same with Evan Stanley. That's one thing you guys got to realize. Whether you like what they're doing or not, and I agree there are some things that need to be worked on and improved. It's because of the fact that these are freelance people. And sometimes they might have a lot of projects that are due around the same time, and maybe they do get rushed. And you can see that in the artwork, in the writing. So we do have to take that into account. But anyway, I'll provide a link down below so you guys can read his entire entry yourself. Let me know what you guys think, and I will talk to you all later. God bless. Take care.